And wait, and baby, I'm TFC till I die.
Hello and welcome back to Toronto Till I Die, the Toronto FC fan show. I'm Mike Newell, and yeah, it's a light week for TFC. Not a lot going on, to be perfectly honest, but they're still on their Leagues Cup break. That will end Saturday against Houston, but we still have a few topics to quickly touch on for you good listeners this week. We'll talk a little bit about a quiet but not or consequential transfer window for TFC. We're previewing a little bit of the playoff run-in with 8 games left in the season. There's a little bit to talk about there. And then we will have James Grossi joining us, hopefully at the bottom of the hour, to talk a little TFC too. A couple of questions for him. What's going on with the Baby Reds or Junior Reds or the Twos, whatever you like, nickname you like to use for them. But we'll drop into that today on the show. Bringing in, of course, my co-host, as always, the three of us back again on a pod. First time in a while. Jeffrey P. Nesker and Michael Singh. Gents, how you doing? How was the weekend? Mike, we'll start with you because we have not seen you in a bit. But brothers now married. Yay!
Yay! No, kinda. Man, with these, so my background's Hindu. So with these weddings, man, it's a true. 4-month long process. I don't know about actually 4 months, but man, there's so many events. So this week actually is officially going to be the big week. So a couple of different events this week. I'm the best man for the wedding, so it's going to be, go. Yeah, I mean, thanks guys. I appreciate the congratulations. It's my brother. It's not me, man.
you ain't done that yet.
I'm there for the party, man. I'm there for the party and the good time. Let's get real.
Excellent.
But yeah, no, man. I was gonna say, like, I've missed the last couple episodes, but I feel like I haven't really missed much with Toronto FC.
I think that's pretty charitable. Yeah.
I mean, look, there was a major trade in which a very liked young player got sent to Rivals, but we'll get your takes on that in a few minutes. Jeff, how you been?
I'm laughing at turds. Oh damn! Never mind. To take it back. Amazing, amazing. Yeah. Ben coming in, married to the Benny. Grind. Yeah, Benny. His pod race takes are the best. How am I doing? I'm so relaxed, but I'm worried that my relaxation will fade now that I'm back in Toronto. But I was out at a cottage over the weekend. Got to do some swimming on a lake. Got to drink a lot more beer than I've been drinking over the last couple of months. Yeehaw! Got to watch Arsenal take 3 points, and earlier this afternoon Spurs take 0. That was fantastic. So everything is coming out.
They drew.
Oh, I thought I'm sorry. Maybe I overspoke, but all right. Well, we have 3 points and they have 1, and Jamie Vardy's still my hero. So that is, I can still say those two things.
The Vardy party still exists and is still well alive in 2024. All right, guys.
Sorry, go ahead. Charlotte bid on him, eh? Or they had talks with
interesting
about potentially bringing him over.
I did not know that when he was still in the Champo before they got promoted back up. Or wow, that's
you don't give me sport clearly, Jeff. You clearly don't read.
Anyway, tell us all about it. That's why you're here. So Charlotte made a bid on him. Charlotte's been pretty aggressive with some bids, actually.
Dean Smith, now Charlotte's coach, used to coach Jamie Vardy, right, at Leicester. So there's the connection there. And Charlotte was ambitious this window, man. The names that they were linked with, some real tangible talks. I did not expect it from Charlotte. I'll be honest. Like, I thought Charlotte was going to be kind of another one of those clubs at MLS that is middle of the pack and, always going to be, I don't know if mediocre is the right word, but always going to be a club that tries to win the MLS way. Whereas, now I feel like they're one of the top spenders. They're one of the go-getters. They're the people who are trailblazers.
Well, it doesn't super surprise because like once they started dropping some of the DPs and they opened up the DP spot, I think their owner Dave Tepper was pretty open about like we'll spend the money if the right player is there, right? Like I think they've made it clear that they want to spend. I don't know. I think they did the 3 DP. We'll talk about the designations for teams in a second because we'll talk a little bit about the transfer window and TFC's role, but they'll definitely spend on DPs. Like it's just the question. I think they realized sort of trying to do it the MLS DP route didn't quite work the first time around. If you think about Kopetti, if you think about Swiderski to a certain extent, right? Wojciak, they didn't quite pan out, right? So now they're gonna go swing for the fences. Weren't they trying to go after Almiron, like to try to do a transfer fee for Almiron?
Yeah.
I mean, they were like 10 million short of what Newcastle wanted, but they tried.
Yeah, they sure did.
Yeah, no, they were in on that too. Apparently, according to Tom, like they were pretty aggressive in that, and they had another big DP move that fell through, and they still were able to, strike a loan, which gave them some flexibility for the rest of this year to have a DP, and then weigh their options again in January. So again, we're starting off this podcast talking Charlotte FC thanks to Jamie Vardy, but also their ambition, man. They're getting a lot of buzz around MLS, and I think for good reason.
Yeah, and you think about it, if you look around the league, like some teams did some nice business. I mean, like you think what you want about it or not, but Marco Royce going over to LA Galaxy to be their DP. There have been some moves around the league, and then there's TFC.
It's not even a DP.
Not even DP. I suspect he'll be DP next year, but
if he still can lift his legs, I mean he's 1,000 years old. I think sure.
Well, we'll see. I think MLS will be kinder on his body, but we'll see about turf. But it does bring us to TFC and a quiet window for the Reds, which is funny because we did talk about it at the beginning of the window, saying this could be a bit more of a transformational one for the team. In some ways it was, in some ways it wasn't, right? Like I think, I think, all right, you bring in Wingo. That was something that was supposed to happen at the end of last window. Okay, they get that done. And I think we had all thought there would be more outgoing than incoming, but in the end, really the outgoing, the only one is Jaquille Marshall-Rutty in a trade to Montreal, which was probably of all the players that you thought was going out the window, that was probably not one of them. Mike, Jeff and I talked about it, so we don't have to rehash our thoughts.
So curious to hear your take.
But wanted to get your thoughts on the trade and sort of the value TFC got back, and is it sort of the right value and the right sort of,
But before he does that, Turts, a quiet Wingo, absolutely. I love that very much. Thanks very much for that. Well done.
Okay, Turts. Yeah. So Jamar, okay, if we're looking at this from where the player is today. They get 1.3 million in allocation money, and they get a significant sell-on clause, which is at this point today, all things removed, probably a good value, right? It's one of the, if not the highest, I think, fee we've seen for a homegrown player within Major League Soccer, right? Yeah, the selling clause can't be ignored too. I think that part's such a big factor about this because who knows what Jaquille goes on to do. Where the club is today, we've talked about this in the past. It's okay for them to develop young players, homegrown players, and turn it into currency in Major League Soccer. That's totally fine. That's part of the process. Has to be part of the process, especially in a place like Toronto where I think there's a lot of talent and there's a lot of young talent coming through that, you can flip. This is also what got Bob Bradley in a ton of trouble because what had happened was all of a sudden it was less than a year before he started to make the Schaffelberg trades, the Lucas McNaughton trades. Year in, you got Luca Petrasso, just off the top of my head. And the reason why those trades were made were because the timeline for their, I guess, window to compete was moved up, right? And in order for TFC to do some of the things that they wanted to do quickly, like bringing back, Richie Laryea on a loan move, trading for, Mark Anthony K, right? Stuff that you would consider to be win now trades. You had to sacrifice some of those young assets because, and Bob always talks about this, the team, quite frankly, just didn't have assets that they had to give up, right? The only kind of currency that was on the squad were some young, valuable players. And, fast forward, I don't even know if it took a year, but fast forward a couple months and those moves quickly burned Toronto FC. And that to me was by far the biggest mistakes of the Bob Bradley era was the timeline got accelerated. They had to free up salary cap space. They sacrificed young players and they weren't able to uh, convert some of those young players into the right currency, or the team wasn't ready around, some of the players that they brought in, right? The Mark Anthony K trade, obviously, one stands out. Like that's a ton you gave up for Mark Anthony K. Which, by the way, one of those picks was Mose Bombito, who just went for the record deal in Major League Soccer for a center back to Nice. But shout out Canada's national team, though. So all that being said, that's what that's where the first place, that's where my mind goes, is like, okay, is this the right time to be making a trade like this? First of all, and B, what exactly do they use that currency for? How do they use that cap space, right? And the only way that we're going to be able to measure the success of this is how good Toronto FC are between now and, next year, where they can utilize some of that allocation money. If the answer is Toronto FC still at the, a fringe playoff team or near the bottom of the table, I don't know if right now is the right time to pull the trigger. The other factor here is obviously his contract, right? Jaquille's contract is up, like I said, not at the end of this season, the end of next season, year and a half. And this is kind of years in the making, but I get a strong sense that he wasn't going to re-up here for a let's say a hometown discount deal, right?
Yeah, the sweetheart deal.
He was going to take TSC to, and several reasons for that, right? When Richie Laryea was brought back here not once but twice during times where Jaquille Marshall-Rutty was starting to elevate his game. Right, the first time he went down with the knee injury, he had a great first half of the season under Bob Bradley. Went down with the knee injury, and by the time he's recovered, Richie Laryea is joining Toronto FC on loan. Right, we can make the argument this year. That position was labeled for Jaquille, especially had a strong preseason. He was amount of times that John Herman hyped him up during preseason, and then of course Richie Laryea joins the team on a permanent basis again. So the way that he was treated, I'm not sure he felt that Toronto was the right place for him to develop. And also, like, when he first signed that contract in 2020, there was an understanding between Jaquille and Jaquille's party and Toronto FC that he was signing a long-term contract for them to help him get to Europe, right? TFC turned down 7-figure offers for Jaquille Marshall-Rutty, and because they wanted the 8-figure offers for Jaquille Marshall-Rutty from what I'd add is significant clubs, right?
Yeah.
So from a sheer asset management perspective, they diminished the asset completely.
100%.
From where it once was to where it is today, where they had to pull the trigger on a $1.3 million move plus the sell on, right?
Yeah,
so
Mary move.
Long-winded way of saying is that it's a diminished asset, but they felt that now is the right time to pull the trigger because come January you're shopping him, you're probably not getting as much, given that he has 1 year remaining on his contract, could sign a free contract agreement in the summer. You're not getting nearly as much, so they decided to cut ties with the asset at this time. But a lot of it went into diminishing the asset, diminishing their strength of position, and they could have got a lot more had they pulled the trigger earlier, which isn't necessarily this management's fault, but does speak to, the kind of blueprint, because Jaquille was a guy, when you talk to, let's say, Bill Manning about him, they use Alphonso Davies comparison, not necessarily just because of the player, but the pathway, right? It was 2 years in MLS. You sell him for, 8-figure deals, significant amount of money, and, that's how you treat a star young player. Didn't work out like that. So, that's what it is. Yeah.
It's funny. I mean, it makes perfect sense when you bring up Richie as the guy that kind of blocked his pathway when, I was quick to point my finger at the other winger, the other side of the field. But I think it's I'd say, well, I mean, Richie's kind of ambidextrous, but you know who I was blaming, and it's interesting because there's a sort of logic to Lorenzo. I was blaming this move on, Lorenzo collecting skulls, right? Like Schaffelberg and now JMR and maybe Crescito.
Yeah.
Like he's just blocking everybody's development over there, and because you're not going to bench Lorenzo.
Why Crescito? Crescito can't develop anymore.
I just wanted to throw in Crescito there, just to add, just rules of three, Mikey saying.
No, the Schaffelberg was bang on. Like that's literally Bob Bradley talked about that, right? They had Lorenzo in that position. Schaffelberg's best position was the left winger. You're bang on there. I don't know if Jaquille was the case, more so. They also had Bernadeschi on the right wing.
You make a good point.
What's his best position?
Nobody knows. I don't think he knows anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's wingback still, but yeah, I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
Now, here's a scroller from Turts, just quickly. When Hernandez came over, he talked about how LAFC sell players to accumulate transfer GAM to start the next season way ahead of other teams, and how TFC would try to emulate that. And then they followed up with this as the start of that process. I don't disagree. My question to you guys isn't do you agree or disagree, but I'm sure you're going to say that. Is that smart to be doing this in the background of Albatross contracts? Once again, I'm throwing Lolo under the bus, but I have to mention them. Like, is it smart to be doing that concurrently while you're waiting for these Albatrosses to get off your neck and stop being there? Or do you have to? I mean, at this point, you sort of have to, I guess, because they're not going anywhere and you can't sit on your hands either. So I guess I answered my own question there. But I mean, what do you have to say about
with the amount that they're investing? This is a win now team, right? There's no more development years for the squad, because they're paying Lorenzo Insigne $15 million. They're paying Bernadeschi whatever it is, $6, $7, $8 million dollars, right? But these guys aren't getting younger. They're signed till 2026. There's no, let's wait until let's see how next season is. It's now mode for this Toronto FC team. And yeah, I think Turts is spot on with that. Like, this is clearly what the club is trying to do, right? They're trying to accumulate more cap space to give them room to do more things. And we've seen so far, what I'll say is this management team has been able to optimize their current cap situation. And, all the moves that they brought in, save for maybe one or two, have been really good moves where you could look at the value of the contracts and be like, okay, they are getting either, market value, like what they should be getting, or they're getting more than that out of the player.
100%.
So, give them more room to, let's say, cook, and let's see what this management team can do. That part's exciting. I think from a Toronto FC fan perspective, you got to be excited about that, because while a small collective of Toronto FC fans may appreciate the development of homegrown players, may appreciate the development of Canadians, may love seeing young players come through, the majority of Toronto FC fans want to see winning soccer.
Second star. Yeah, second
and
star.
Want to see, exactly. Want to see more of the players that will play in your lineup week in, week out, make differences, players that could sell jerseys, kind of thing. Could have that been Jaquille Marshall-Rutty? Yeah, potentially. But then you also talk about his contract stuff, which you went into. So I'm fascinated to see how they use that money, because it's going to come down to that. They just have, a lot more room to play with now. So let's see how they leverage that, because it's not room they had before, I guess.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one, because I think you can look at this from two sides. I think there was an emotional reaction right off the bat of, we've watched this player come into the team at 15 essentially, and develop. And then, of course, Bill Manning comes out with his statements being like he's been training at Liverpool, he's been training at Arsenal, and we see him as a $15 to $20 million player. And I've always kind of looked at that and said, I don't know if you should have said that.
Huge mistake.
Right? Like
huge mistake.
Outwardly, in terms of just the raised expectations on the player, and not giving that player the time to really develop and cook and become who he thought he can be and who he could still become. Like, let's not forget that he's only 20, right? Like he's super young. But for me, the interesting part of this is now TFC operating in this sort of where we're thinking ahead a little bit. We're trying to accumulate gammon assets to go down the road and make bigger moves in a, as you say, win now mentality. We're going to talk about it in a bit, but like, maybe we even talk about it now. Like this team's in a playoff run now, right? Like they're 8th in the East. And they have 8 games left starting on Saturday against Houston. They're back off the break. They're on the road. And, there's still time to sign a free agent up until the 13th of September. So, again, it's interesting what to do with that GAM because you could, in theory, go out and sign somebody. Now, is it somebody of consequence if somebody's going to really kind of push you over the edge with what they've got? Probably not. But if they're making moves right now, there's rumor that Kashif Mailula's out the door. Now I know that's not as consequential in terms of the roster, but that's another move of another outbound player. So I wonder if this is leading to a potential move before the 13th to pick up somebody to come into the team. Or, as you've both sort of surmised, that this is a setup for 2025 and potentially the free agent moves or buying down of contracts, things like that. I wonder what your guys' thought on that.
Yeah, it's a good question because I think John Molinaro had clarified this. You can carry allocation money over from 2024 to 1 year in advance, so 2025, and then that's where that allocation money would expire. Regardless of what happens, I want to see them take like an Atlanta United mentality into this, or a Charlotte FC mentality where they don't make a move for the sake of making a move, right? You have cap space, absolutely. Do you want to, commit to a player for a year and a half or a year, however long it may be, and use up that cap space because you just have it this year, but it also carries over to next year. Like you don't want to do that, obviously, right? You want to make sure it's the right player. That said, like I mean, you're acquiring 2024 allocation money, right? I'm not sure. Obviously, I don't think anyone's sure about the cap work and logistics and in the background, but you have to imagine that acquiring 2024 allocation money at the end of the window does signify that they are looking at something and they have to, maybe utilize some of that. And if that means that they have a player in mind that is a long-term piece, great. If that means that they can find a way to swing a short-term deal if possible, a 4-month contract, great, even better. But
here comes the Seba rumors.
but they have to I think like try to find a way to leverage what they've acquired, because if not, then you do wonder why 2024 cap space was included as part of that deal. Because I mean
maybe
I would love the answer.
Yeah,
for
that's not so would I. What is your take on this is earmarked to get Richie off his DP deal going into the 2025 season? So that they could maybe come in as a 2 DP, 3 U22 side when they have to declare it to.
What's Richie's cap hit at? Or what's his salary at?
His salary's like 1.6. I think he's pretty much at like the max kind of low end
DP.
Like so is he if he, as long as he's under the threshold, then yeah, I do think there is possibility to that for sure. The one thing is I'm not sure we're going to talk about it too much, but TFC's declaration of going to the 3DP 322 initiative model, right? That's what they selected. That's what they chose to do. when you buy down a DP in MLS, I gotta refresh myself on the rosters, but I know there is something in there that says you do have to sign another DP of
Yes.
equal
or greater
value.
value.
So then you're stuck with the 3 anyway. Well, this is hilarious tomfoolery.
Right.
Okay.
So technically, like, you kind of have 4, but one, like, on the spreadsheet looks less than the other. It's kind of it's the MLS cap gymnastics that you kind of have to do.
I don't even know anymore. No idea. Oh, G Money saying only if you use TAM. So if we use GAM, I don't care anymore. My brain exploded.
Yeah, so if you use GAM, then maybe you just open up a DP spot and then you go with the 2 and 4. But then why would they not just classify the 2 and 4 and signal that if that's what the case was, right? And get the extra $2 million.
It's not supposed to make sense, Michael. It's MLS.
You get the $2 million of allocation money. So to answer your question, then I don't think that is part of the reason this season, at least. Because if that was the case, they would get an extra $2 million in allocation money. Which, by the way, I don't know if we're going to talk too much about Cassius Maula, but we should discuss like the way TFC has used its under 22 initiative roster slots. It's non-existent, and it's probably the poorest usage of it across Major League Soccer.
Well, they haven't used it.
Oh, easy.
Like, really,
they haven't used it.
Like, they
He's
have
got, what,
but
88 minutes of MLS play, like not even a full game.
Well, I mean, Io was technically a U22 player, right? Like,
and
Io was under
Ibarra.
that. Yeah, Franco for a hot minute of Franco Ibarra when you loaned him, and then Cassius, right? Like,
that was a fever dream.
It's been bad. And again, it the idea, I think, is to move to that model eventually. Whether that's going to happen in 2025, we'll see. I think that's the plan, or at least that's the idea. Whether they can actually pull it off or not is another question. But I mean, they have to go to the 3DP setting for now because they have 3 DPs currently on the roster, and they weren't going to like get rid of one at the end of this window, right? So that was a foregone conclusion. But I think, you know, if you look at, and you know what, more teams I think took the 3 DP route more than I probably expected. Now, granted, those teams probably already have 3 senior DPs on the roster, so you kind of have to. But it will be interesting to see how TFC kind of manage this for next season because, you know, whether you can buy. Sorry?
And I'm saying that's a good point because I don't know why I was thinking of this way, that this is for this year and next year, but no, you reset it at the end of the season. So,
This was just basically saying that they called you and left a message on your answer phone. Basically, like it's a meaningless declaration in terms of the real declarations are next season at the start of next season, right?
Yeah, that's a good point because you know I mean, if we're looking at this,
did you find the article? I looked. I could not find it anywhere. But go ahead.
Yeah. But if we're looking at this from like a year now or 6 months from now, I'd be shocked if there's a lot of teams using that 3 DP model because I feel like
$2 million
is too attractive.
$2 million Garber bucks. Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing is you've had some really good under 22 initiative players come through MLS and then go on and, you know, make some pretty nice bank for some teams. So, you know, effective players at a cost controlled number that you can turn into even more profitable assets for your organization. Like, I think that's a no brainer.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
But I think we're realizing it's easier said than done, and that there are massive.
Well, you got to have you have to have the scouting network, right? Like, you got to be able to invest.
Well, not even the scouting network. Figuring out how to do it with your existing roster without triggering. We're going to use TAM for this. Well, you can't. You have to have 3 DPs.
Well, that is one thing Jason Hernandez is good at. Yeah. Right. Like that is the he kind of is a salary wonk. Like he knows the rules and how to use them. The question will just be how effective.
With one hand tied behind his back by the DP contracts that are giant albatrosses on this team's finances. So,
well, yeah, I mean,
I believe
if Richie comes off the books as a DP next year, then you're in a good spot. Like, you're in a decent spot, right? You basically have a player that's a DP, that's not a DP, two technically if you count Oso. Right, and at that point, you can add, you can either add another one or you can start using U22s from that perspective. So that is sort of the That's the dream scenario, right?
Yeah, and let's clarify, like Richie Laryea is not making DP money this year, but they classify him as a DP for roster relief. So, to circle back to your point, Jeff, about, was this allocation money, acquired to buy Richie down? Next season, yeah, you could absolutely argue that's going to be one of the ways that they spend a good chunk of this money to get Richie down. But the question then remains, what do they do with that, right? How are they going to go the 2DP 422 initiative model? Are they going to invest in transfer fees? Are they going to invest in a third DP? Like which route did they go here? So, like I said, this gives TFC, Jason Hernandez, a lot of flexibility that they didn't have before.
Very true.
Excellente. They have not used their buyout this season. G Money has raised it in the chat. I'm a little disappointed
that we know
it wasn't used. Yeah, that we know of. I'm just confirming that we know of. They have not exercised the buyout on IO or anybody.
But interesting. So okay, all right. I won't go into this. Is now getting way too into MLS salary wonkiness because Jordan Caruso got signed today by Real Monarchs, right? Like Salt Lake's USL team, right? So just wondering because he was put on waivers. So how that all worked. Let's not get into that. James is here.
Well,
sure.
One thing. Let me clarify. Let me.
Oh, he wants to go into it. Oh, yeah, he does. Yeah.
Oh, I love this stuff. But let me clarify.
Go for it, man.
Before we get too deep, Adamo Diamande and Toronto FC, right? They agreed to. Was it a buyout? Was it a wave?
A wave.
I forget what the exact.
It was a wave.
Was it,
yeah,
right?
I think it's a wave. Yeah.
So the reason why TFC haven't bought him out completely was they would have had to. They can't just go say, you know what, we're buying you out, right? The player and Toronto FC both have to agree on terms for the buyout. Actually, it's what held up 100%. The Josie Altidore thing for so long. As you remember, when TFC were working out a deal with him prior to the start of the 2022 season, I believe it was.
Yep.
So Adama Diamande would have to agree to whatever the buyout would be with Toronto FC in order for them to proceed with it, right? So it's not just a one-way street. So consider that when, we're voicing your frustration about TFC not buying out a player, there's a two-way street there. And I'm not sure that terms were great between the two parties. Let's just say at the end of the...
I mean, when you're discussing a buyout, that's a pretty safe bet.
Well, when you've got a lot of guaranteed money on the
it's
on the
not rainbows
left,
and unicorns.
It's not like you're gonna be like, I'll just take $1,000 and leave.
No, TFC are not coming in going, we're going to give you everything that's on that to the cent. They're coming in lowballing you, and it's a absolutely 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. All right,
let's bring
James
him on.
Here. Let's just bring on Mr. Grossi. Hey, James, how you doing?
Oh, you got blinds. I'm happy. Nice.
What's up, James?
I kept the curtains closed today so I can actually look at the camera a little bit. Nice to see all you boys. It's been a little while.
Yeah, absolutely. We're happy you're back. I do have a couple of TFC2 questions for you. But before we do that, we haven't got to this yet. So I do also want to get your opinion on this because you are a gentleman and a scholar. But TFC have 8 games left in this season. Okay, at least in the regular season. We're not counting cups yet. We'll do a cup preview show soon, starting this Saturday against Houston. It's a tough run-in. If you look at their games remaining, it's Houston away, DC at home, Austin at home, Columbus at home, Colorado away, Chicago away, and they finish off the season with 2 at home against Red Bull, and then Inter Miami by that time could be Shield winners. How are you seeing this run in for TFC? They're 8th right now. Cling on to that 8th spot. How do you see this potential running going for TFC, and how important is it maybe to get some points early on when you're taking on the likes of DC and Austin at home?
I was just looking at the schedules today, and 2 things sort of stood out to me is that TFC has fewer games left than a lot of the other teams. TFC has 8 games left. Most teams have 9, a couple have 10. So that table is a little bit misleading depending on how the games in hand work out. And then TFC, I think, are the only team who end before decision day. And so they have fewer games and a lot less time to sort of sort themselves out before we're going to know what the end of the season is going to look like for this group. So, we saw some good moments in that Leagues Cup performances. I thought the game at Red Bulls, considering how poor they were when they went down there in the league earlier this year, was a good showing. I thought the showing against Pachuca at home was something, but then you go to Miami, a game that everyone said they were up for and they were ready for, and they were relishing the chance to go at Miami in a knockout type situation, and they just come out as flat as we've seen them come out all this season. So, my big question heading into this final stretch is which team is the real team, and are they able to bring that to performances, week in, week out? This season's been such a mishmash in terms of games every 3 or 4 days for large stretches of it, players unavailable. Like, I don't know that we've barely seen the big 4 players play together at all this year. And, John's done a good job of bringing the group together and getting them to buy in. But I think, if we go all the way back to that opening game of the season in Cincinnati, nobody could have predicted that the path that you chart out would be as disrupted as it's been. And so, time's running out. I think we've seen a lot of good things from this group this year, but we've also seen a lot of games where they weren't up to the level. And so now is sort of the time where they're going to have to show what they can do with these 8 games left if they want to be playing in that postseason, because they haven't left themselves much of a cushion.
Nope. Very, very fair.
I think one thing that's worth adding too is when you look at the schedule, 5 home games and 3 away games. That's massive for this club, because we know how much better they perform in front of BMO Field than they do away from home, where their struggles have been pretty well documented. 3 of those games, albeit, are against Inter Miami, who are the best road team in Major League Soccer, the Columbus Crew, who, you can make a pretty strong argument that they could be the best team in Major League Soccer, and then the Red Bulls, who are always no easy pushover, especially when they come to BMO Field, right? So it's not the easiest run in, but their schedule, I would argue they made it through the hardest part of their schedule. So if there is a time for them to pick up off that momentum from Leagues Cup, or just a couple solid performances, I think the heat got to them in Miami a little bit, especially down the run when they went up a man. But if you can carry some of that momentum over a well-rested team, hopefully Bernadeschi is okay. There's opportunity for them, but it's like James says, it's got to be now. It has to be now.
Yeah, and I think coming off, the game in Houston is actually going to be it's going to be massive, right? Because if you can get off on the right foot from that game, okay, we'll see what happens in the Canadian Championship on the Tuesday. It's a short turnaround to play that game. Whether you advance or not to the final, you'll find out, and you'll sandwich another game in there. But that run of Houston, DC, Austin before you have to take on Columbus. If you can come away, look, obviously 9 points would be great. But if you even come away with 6, you're doing yourself some favors there, especially, when you're thinking about, a team like DC that is behind you, I believe, in the standings right now, but, still kind of within striking distance. You can, if you can get a result, against Colorado in Colorado, just sneak a point. You start to maybe build a case to get into those last playoff spots. They're going to need some help for sure. You'll need probably Montreal to fall off a little bit to keep it safe, but there's a chance there. There is a path that's there for them to sneak into the last playoff spot, and once you're in, who knows what happens, right? But like you said, I think it is tough. It's a tough sort of final road to this, especially with teams that have games in hand on this club.
What's crazy is I think James said, we don't really know what this team is, which team is going to show up every week. But when this team is at its best, I think they can compete with the best in Major League Soccer. I think they're close. I wouldn't say they go in with the favorites or the better team by any means, but they can be competitive in any one of those matches. So it's all about what James said, what team shows up, right? And I don't care who they're playing. Which team is going to show up when you're at home? Like at BMO Field, you pick up those 15 points, you're in the playoffs. Can they do that?
So that's the number, 15 to 24. That's your number, 15 to 24 points, and
I just want to be clear. I completely made that number up, so I don't know if that's actually true.
Because I was going to ask that question. How many points?
About that.
We don't have it's not baseball. We don't have a magic number like that, you know.
Oh, okay, because I want one.
Well, if you think about so like if you do sort of the math, okay, so let's just say you do 9 points between the first 3 games back in the league, all right. So you drop a result against Columbus, get a point in Orlando or in Colorado, excuse me. Could be Chicago on the road,
Colorado Rapids,
yeah. And then your last 2 games against Red Bull and Miami, tough games as you mentioned, but you're home, right? You get out of that gets you to 15 points approximately, right? And at that
45 points because we're on 30, right?
Right, exactly. 45 points. If somebody could look at last year's standings, if somebody could look at that quick,
I don't ever want to look at last year's standings ever again.
So well, I mean, if you look at it really quick, I think that was enough to get you in. And again, last year. Yeah, last year was.
I would say this year is probably worse. Charlotte made it with 43 last year. I would say this year is probably worse.
Right. So that should, in theory, get you into the playoffs, into that 8-9 spot.
The goal.
And then you're playing with house money. So yeah, I think 45 points is the magic number. You maybe even to get in with 41 or 2. Depending on how things go in results, but I think if you get to 45, I think you're good. Thoughts? No? Yes?
I mean, I love that we're still asking the question of what is this team, like what team are we going to see? That is the team we're going to see. That this team is a question mark. It should be our new badge. Like, huh? That's the new TFC badge. So we'll see all sides of it. I guess my question is, can the team that is both sides of the coin, both extremes, get to 45 points? Do you think this team, no changes, the same insane seesaw that we've been watching all season long, is that a 45-point team? Or does there need to be real change up down the stretch?
I think it really comes down to who's available. Like if John can get a consistent starting 11 and he starts to have those depth options coming off the bench that we've seen a little bit in recent weeks. Like one of the terminologies that he started to use a little bit is something that Johnny Chimini uses with TFC2 a lot, is the idea of you have starters and finishers. And it's a really basic version of it is just sort of you're using those substitutes to your advantage. And sometimes the game state through that first hour is going to look one way and you want it to look one way. And maybe the wise play is to hold a guy like Lorenzo in reserve, let Derek Etienne Jr., have his way with the defender on that side, keep them busy, and then have Lorenzo come in for a half hour where everyone's a little bit tired. And we've seen a little bit of that. Davy Flores came off the bench not too long ago to really shut down a match. I think that was the Pachuca game that he came on in the second half? I'm blanking a little bit.
Yeah, it was.
And so having enough bodies around that you can start to play that second dimension of the chessboard is something that well, I mean, like right now we don't know what Fedi's status is. We haven't gotten an update since that last match. And John said after the game that it was something that Fede was feeling going in, and they thought that he could manage through it, and he wasn't able to. So for me, if they can have that same 15 core players together, then I think that there's a chance that we might see them play some of their best football. Because, guys have had some games together now. We're starting to see that little bit of depth. We're starting to see, some guys will be coming back before too long. I don't know what Coelho's timeline is, but he gives you another different look in the middle of that park. Brandon Sylvania is on his way back. So they might be getting healthy at the right time, but the problem is you haven't necessarily had that run up to get everything ticking over nicely. And to something you said earlier, Mikey, I think one of the real distinctions, I've asked a bunch of coaches this over the years, is like, what is the percentage difference between a team at the top of the table, so you're Columbus or you're Miami, and a team that's down at the bottom, like TFC last year or New England this year? And like, For me, it's not. We're not talking like a 10% difference in terms of the quality of performance. We're talking like maybe 5% or maybe 4%.
Yeah.
And you get those little percentages and those half percentages by, guys having the reps together and having, if one guy is missing, the next guy can step in and do a serviceable enough job that the absence isn't as noticeable. And then you get into little things like, did you win your last game? Did you win the game before? And the mental side of that, of feeling good about where things are going and feeling good about how you're playing and how your team is functioning. All of those little things add percentages. And yeah, I agree, on their day, this TFC team can go toe-to-toe with pretty much everybody in this league. It's just they aren't able to have their day when they want to enough.
Yeah.
And so the question now...
That's so eloquent. Yeah.
The question now is just they got 8 days to figure it out. They've got to have 8 of those days.
Yeah, you do.
I'm ready to run through a wall. Let's go, Grossi.
Yeah. That's better. That was better than any given Sunday, man. Like
talk,
seriously, that was
for pre-game talk. All right, let's shift a little bit because you mentioned a certain player that has made an appearance this year at TFC 2. Let's talk a little bit about our junior Reds down in MLS Next Pro. Brandon Cervania, ACL injury last year. We all know he's been out the entire year so far, but he has made an appearance now with TFC 2, I believe last week. Maybe talk a little bit about that, about his, he came on for a cameo appearance. I think he was on for 30, maybe less than 30 minutes. But how did he look? And sort of how is that sort of process for him been going in terms of getting him back into the first team?
Yeah, so he came on, I think it was around the 70th minute when TFC were down in Atlanta, and TFC had gone down a man, so it wasn't exactly the ideal game state. Marko Stoyadinovic, a couple of days after signing his TFC 2 contract, gets a red card about 25 minutes in. So, a little bit of bad luck for that young man. But, Brandon, it was an equal mix of, this guy's been out for nearly a year. So you saw little moments of that. But then there were flashes of like, he still knows what he's doing. He still knows what's going on. He was moving well, which is one of the first things you always look for with a guy with a knee injury. Like, how is he protecting that knee? Is he trusting himself to use it fully? You got the sense that he was happy to be out there. It's a tiny little thing, but I love it when a player is absolutely zipping the ball around. Like, too often passes for me are just kind of like you put it in the right area and you hope that it gets to the guy in time. And Brandon was whipping those balls around the pitch for his teammates. And we saw a couple of moments where he looked a little bit rusty. There was one shooting opportunity that he had where he took a bit of a heavy touch and lost it. But there was another one where he had a neat little change of balance and swap of feet to make room for a shot. It ended up being blocked, but you could see some quality there and some confidence. And I was a little surprised that we didn't see him this past weekend with TFC2. He played 20-25 minutes in Atlanta. They had a home game just yesterday, Sunday, against Philly's second team. And he was not involved in that. So you never know with that whether it was he did his 20 minutes, hasn't played, he needs a bit more time to see it out, or if they got what they needed from that performance and it was better to have him training with the first team than playing with the second team. So, given it has been 11 months, I think it was September to August that he'd been away from the pitch. I thought it was a very encouraging performance from him and a reminder of the kind of footballer he is. He's not the most flashy guy, but he's a guy that will do a lot out there for you and a real solid piece. So John will be glad to have him back.
Baller, right? He trained with Bayern when he was with Dallas still. He was very highly touted as a young American player. And I think even last year we saw flashes of a guy with real quality in the middle of the park. I caught some of the game. I didn't catch all of it, but I thought I saw Brandon. It could be a byproduct of just the game, but I thought I saw him playing a bit higher up the pitch than maybe we've seen in the past. Is that true, James?
Yeah, TFC. So they went down. They took a lead through Altobelli with a lovely free kick.
Yes.
Stoyadinovic got sent off, and then Atlanta scored like shortly thereafter. And then Atlanta got into the lead just a couple minutes into the second half. So TFC were chasing that game. And then Atlanta had a red card of their own around the hour mark. So it was one of those where you're down a goal, We've gotten back to 10v10, and they were kind of pushing for it. So, yeah, it was a lot more of Cervania in and around the box than we usually see with the first team. And he showed some quality there. It didn't end up coming through, but the side had some chances to pull level on that one. So, yeah, but that said, we haven't had a chance to see him play under Herdman and exactly how he's going to fit into how Herdman has made his subtle little tweaks with what he expects from those guys in those positions. And Davy Flores has been he's really changed the options in the middle of the park for me. Just having a true guy who's going to sit and protect that back four in that position. Throw in the back three. There's a lot of moving pieces that we don't have to get into right now, but I'm curious how Cervania is going to necessarily slot back into one of those midfield roles.
Well, you think about it, like Debbie's played a lot of minutes, right? Like he's played quite a bit. So, having an understudy that could deputize for him at times and give him some rest, especially if you're going into a playoff push where you're hoping to be in the mix near the end of it. That could be valuable for the team. James, you're getting a lot of questions here.
Lots of questions.
Jeff,
I mean, first,
go with that? Yeah.
Well, first let's bring up Gourds because it will qualify these questions because a lot of them are from Turts, and I can't believe Turts is thinking about the second team at this time in the season. Which
this is a show
fair.
for sickos, Gord. I don't know if you
and we're sickos and we want to be heard again. We just spent like 20 minutes crying about JMR and we're like ready for the next one already. Like, who's gonna go train with Liverpool and break our hearts in 4 years? James Grossi. Let's go with the first one. Calcio Oculo asked one that I'm actually interested in. You may not know the answer, but how serious is our Lazar's injury? Are we getting the full disclosure, or is this guy broken? Did we break him?
Oh no. I whenever it comes to TFC2 and injury things, like it's more word of mouth than like an official report. So we never know exactly what the details are. But the word is that when Canada had their friendly matches in Chile down during the U20s, he came home with a broken foot. And so that means that he is shut down for the season. Now, what that means, there's a lot of bones in that foot. In football, we've seen the metatarsal happen a million times, and guys generally tend to come back from injuries like that, but it does mean that you're off it for a couple months. So I can't be more specific in terms of what it is exactly that the problem is, but he's been shut down for this season as far as I know, and it's been a tough year for him. He was in and out of the lineup at the start of the year. We saw him playing in a scrum cap for little periods, and then he got injured before Canada had their chance to go to the U20s and fight for that spot in the World Cup. So, but he's also so young, and I think that's something that's really important to remember with these young guys is that like he came onto the scene last year as a 17-year-old, and when the team was going through a terrible spell, he showed what he was capable of. And you're never going to have just higher and higher and higher over the course of your career. You're going to have years where you take a big step forward, and then the next year you might sort of stay stable or even take a step back or two. And so I think it's not been the year that he would have wanted for himself, but if you use years like this right, they can serve you well in the longer term of your career. So no, don't worry too much about him. He'll be back raring to go next year.
Pretty hard to take a step forward or back with a broken foot. I just had to get that.
Go on, John. Yeah, that's Lazar Stefanovic, by the way, for those who didn't pick up on that.
Laser.
Correct me if I'm wrong, James, but would you say probably the top prospect on Toronto FC 2?
Here we go. Break our hearts.
So like I kind of have a running list in my head in terms of like a tier system, but the thing that makes that almost a moot point is that you very rarely get to the first team because you're the most valuable prospect. You get that first team contract if you're coming in. Maybe on occasion there's a guy who signs that contract because the club is trying to protect you from going elsewhere, and that is definitely a factor that you have to consider. Maybe even Jaquille back when he was 15. We didn't really think that he'd be playing a lot as a 15-year-old. But
Adam Perlman this year, right?
Yeah, Pearls.
So I don't know. My point is more sort of that the first team needs to have space for you and have playing time and have roster, salary spot, all that kind of stuff. So it's never quite as simple as who's the most talented guy. And then at the same time, a guy like Perlman, it's more valuable for him to spend the season being a leader with TFC2 than it is to sit on the bench with TFC and not make the game day 18 and just train with the guys. And the beauty of having both teams, all the teams up at the BTG, is that guys can hop into the various training sessions, and we see TFC2 guys in there with the first team all the time. And Perlman will be one of those guys who's on that track. So what kind of prospect were you guys looking for, or should I just give you some of the names that I'm thinking are on that?
Well, the question was top, so
all right. Yeah. I think if you're looking at the guys who walk in tomorrow, like who if they signed a first team,
not the most first team ready prospect.
Okay.
I want highest ceiling.
Highest ceiling.
I'll put you on the spot here.
It's tricky. I'll tell you a guy who I really like, who I don't think has gotten a lot of attention yet, and that's a midfielder named Lucas Holguin. And he kind of reminds me a little bit, and this is a very, very general statement, so don't get too excited, everybody. I see glimpses of Osorio in him, the way that he can deal with being under pressure and find ways to wriggle and turn and maintain possession and find an outlet pass. He's sort of a 6'8". He's sort of a guy that links up. He's the second or third ball out of a build out. Not a guy who's going to get a ton of assists or a ton of goals. I think he's got 1 assist this year, maybe 2. So I see little bits of Osorio in the way that his close control and his ability to find gaps and wiggle out of things. And I see little bits of Marky Delgado in him, in that he's a guy who doesn't dally on the ball an awful lot. He knows his job is to get the ball, to get it into a good spot, and to find the next forward pass. And the thing that Greg Vanney always loved about Marky Delgado was that Marky would take, if every guy gets 4 seconds on the ball before you're closed down, Marky would make his play in 2 and give that extra second or 2 to the teammate further up the field so that they could do something with that little advantage. And I see little bits of that in Lucas's game too. And he's super young. I think he's 17. He might have turned 18 this year. He was one of the academy guys that saw a ton of action last year, a little bit unexpectedly. And I don't even know for sure that he's on a TFC2 next pro deal. He might still be on an academy deal. So young guy, lots of upside, lots of room to grow. But one that's caught my eye a fair bit over the last 18 months.
Fair. Okay, well, everyone loved that pick. Do we even go back to Turtz's questions because you didn't ask the right questions?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, okay, so if we're looking at upside, right, or looking at the highest ceiling, then here's Turtz's question, because this is the one I was going to ask as well, but I'll let him ask it. Who do you think is the players from TFC that can make the step up to the big club? And given what you've said about roster spacing and sort of needing to have an idea, but who are the guys you think are the next ones up getting a senior deal?
Yeah, so I have like 4 or 5 guys. The guy who's been at the top of the list for the last 2 years is Jesus Batiste. And that's just because he's a very singular. There is one thing that you're asking him to do, and he does it so well that even though other teams know what he's going to do, they can't stop it. And he's just that constant forward threat, super hard worker, always looking to attack, and he's got a knack for finding the back of the net. And
love it.
A winger in those sort of positions that can give you, I think he's scored 4 goals this year, 8 goals last year. He's regularly, if you look at the scope of the 90 minutes, I can count on 1 or 2 hands the number of nights where he hasn't been TFC2's most dangerous attacker. And what you really want from guys when they're coming up to the first team is to know that they're going to perform to this level every time you give them a chance. You don't want, and this is another thing that Vanny said, but I spent a lot of time listening to him, so a lot of these things are stuck in my head, was that you didn't want a guy who was going to be a 9 one day and a 2 the next. You wanted a guy that you knew when you were putting him in the lineup, you were going to get a 7 or an 8 out of him game in, game out. And I think Jesus is that guy, and we've seen little bits of it with the first team as well when he's had those little cameos during the cup, or I think he's been called up for 1 or 2 matches, 1 or 2 regular season matches
to sit on the bench.
Year.
But I think he got into 1 or 2.
I think it was a New England game. I'm remembering a New England
Yeah.
game where we saw that sort of burst that he can give you in that forward thrust. So he's up there. I think, Charlie Sharp is another guy that I think was brought to TFC2 with the idea of he's going to be a first team guy. Like that was
with
sort of the
Sounders. Oh,
is that a Paul Rothrack cut?
Yeah,
Paul's
I got
Paul's
that
doing
mixed up.
quite well.
Sorry. Yeah.
It's still kind of
There we
funny.
go.
Sorry, you should have played off. That was pure comedy.
Yeah, sorry.
No. So Charlie's a guy who he's battled with some injuries this year, and so we haven't quite seen him hit his full head of steam. But you can really see the attributes that made him such a valued prospect coming out of college. He was a little under the radar when TFC selected him back 2 years ago, but to see what he did in the Mac Herman candidacy season, and to see what he's done in the professional environment now, just the way that Johnny Cimini kind of explained it, and I've heard him. I'll give you guys a little behind the scenes here. The conference calls that we have with Johnny Cimini are the announcer calls, and so whenever there's an announcer who hasn't done TFC2 before, there's sort of like certain questions that you get every week in, week out, and so I've heard Johnny give variations of the same answer several times over for a bunch of these questions, and the thing that he always goes to for Charlie is that. Other guys, if they don't hit the net or they miss a chance in training, it's okay. You know what I mean? Like, it's not the end of the world. It's just training. It doesn't matter. Whereas when Charlie is on that ball and he has a chance, he wants to score. His mission is to score. Every time he gets on the ball, every time the ball is near the opponent's box, he's looking at it and analyzing and going, how do I turn this position into a chance for me to score a goal? And true goal scorers, not just guys who have the skill to pick their spots, but guys who relish that hunt for goals and relish using every utility they have to find ways to beat their opponents. And Charlie's got that knack. He's got a good mix of size and speed and mobility, but also this patience. There was one goal he scored this year where the ball dropped to him in the box, and there's about 4 or 5 bodies in front of him, including a couple of teammates. And it was a play that, 9 times out of 10, the guy rushes the shot and ends up banking it off of somebody and loses the chance. And Charlie just sort of slowed himself down, slowed time down, and picked his spot and put it neatly into the little corner where nobody was. So just that combination of the mental side of scoring goals, but also the physical desire to do it is something that I see a lot of in him. So definitely one to watch. And then the next couple on my list are a little bit below that tier. I think Julian Altobelli's done a lot this year to show that he might be ready. And I've made this point with John Molinaro when him and I talk about this a fair bit is we don't really see TFC having a guy who can necessarily step in and see those minutes for when Lorenzo needs a half hour off at the end of the match. And I think Alto's a guy who has obviously not the same level of skill, but he has those same instincts of finding moments to be dangerous in that spot. And he's a little bit more forward-minded than we see Lorenzo. Lorenzo is always, cutting in field and looking for ways to combine. And Altobelli has that, but he also has a bit more of that urge to get into the box himself and to score goals from there. He needs to clean up the number of chances it takes him to score goals sometimes, but we've seen a lot of growth from a guy who was one of those finishers for Cimini in the past to becoming a real leader for this side, and he stepped up in that captain element too, which is something that's one of the fun things about covering the second team is you first meet a guy when he's like 15 or 16 and he's the new guy on the park, and some of them are full of beans and very confident. I remember talking to a 15-year-old Dante Campbell and him telling me he was the best FIFA player at the club, and just sort of the bravado of a young man in that position. And then speaking to him a couple years later in his final season with TFC2 before he went off to Valor, or I think he went to LA Galaxy 2 for a year.
Yeah, he went to Galaxy 2, yeah.
But just the way that his demeanor had changed and the maturity that he had shown in that, I saw glimpses of the guy who would become one of the captains over at Valor in those final conversations with him. So Alto's made some big steps. This one surprised me a little bit when I added it to my list. It was Adisa Di Rosario. Is a guy who's been in the background a little bit over the past 2 or 3 years in terms of TFC2's roster. Luka Gavrin, we've all seen what he was capable of, and Adisa was very much the backup in that situation and didn't see a ton of action. And this year, TFC brought in 2 other goalkeepers to have a look at. Abraham Rodriguez, who started on the weekend, and Shafiq Wilson, who hasn't featured much this year at all. And part of that is that Adisa has taken his chance and run with it. And he's been a really valuable piece back there. Still young. Still needs a lot of experience. But if we're looking at that first team and going, okay, you have Sean Johnson for another year, you have Luca Gavin in the number 2 spot. I don't see any reason why Adisa couldn't be your number 3. And then the last one is the big Brazilian defender, Italo. I think they brought him in to have a good extended look at him. It's always a little bit harder to track defenders on screens. Like, I haven't made it up to York Lions Stadium as much as I would have liked to see these guys play live. But he's a very solid defender, a big body, very calm and confident on the ball, can play every kind of outlet pass you would like. And he's physical in the right ways, but he never puts himself in a situation where he needs to overexert himself. My joke that I've used a couple of times is that I'm not sure I've ever seen him get out of second gear in terms of just putting himself into enough trouble that he needs to panic and get back. And it's not to say he doesn't get beaten. It's not to say that he doesn't make mistakes, but he's been a really solid piece and one that I think they brought in to fit somewhere in that back line. He's played more in the middle of the 3 of late. I think that's a function of TFC2 being a little short of bodies at the moment. But more of one of those outside center backs that John really wants to see get involved in attacks and be sort of the he has a lot of the qualities that we've seen from Nixon Gomes this year. So yeah, exactly. G-Money, right on. He's got those same qualities, a little bit less forward-minded, but some of that might be that, TFC2 is a different environment and that's not necessarily what you need from the guy in that situation. So yeah, those are the 5 guys that, if they signed a first team deal for next season, I wouldn't be surprised. But again, so much of it comes down to where are the spots, where does the first team see value, and which one's going to be joining Paul Rothrock in Seattle.
oh! Every time I see Paul Rothrock score a goal, I'm like, you got to be kidding me, right?
He's been great.
He has been.
My bet is Charlie Sharp. I'm just putting that in early. It's Charlie Sharp.
Yeah,
that's
probably.
my pick, but yeah.
One player that is being asked about quite a bit is Hassan Ayari, and I'll also throw in Charlie Stalin in this while the 2 sort of Sheffield boys that have come in. It's a question just in terms of how they've acclimated to the second team and chances of them going to the first team. I've seen a few TFC2 games. They've looked okay. I'm not sure first team is quite the route yet, but want to get your thoughts.
Just before that, I think my nomination for the guy who's going to end up finding himself somewhere else, although I'm not sure I should say that, is, Mark Fisher is a guy who's been a jack of all trades for this team, and he comes in as the Stanford captain. Really intelligent guy, really smart footballer. He's one of those guys who is a bit of a jack of all trades. TFC have played him on the front line. They played him in midfield. He deputized at center back when they were shorthanded the other day, and he's a guy that I think has the makings of it, but it might not be clear enough for TFC at the moment to see how he fits in. And so he's a guy that I have a lot of time for, and I think is one of the most likely guys to, if he does end up leaving, to find himself a career somewhere, because I think he has that in him. I don't necessarily see that, he fits in this role for the team right now. Mm-hmm. So that would be that. In terms of Charlie and Hassan, we'll start with Charlie, and he's a no-nonsense defensive midfielder. He popped up and scored a goal this year and sort of told us, don't expect that a lot from me, because that's not really the part of the field that I'm going to play in. And what he is he's very much the defensive midfielder who gets the ball and plays that initial outlet pass. That's his role. And the same thing that I said about Olguin in terms of a guy who takes his time and gives it to people further up the field. Charlie's a guy who has that. He has the image of what the field state is in his mind as he receives the ball, and he knows exactly what he's going to do with it before he gets it. And 2 seconds later, the ball is where it needs to be. He's tidy. He's strong defensively in terms of all those elements that you need from the game. Maybe not as forceful as a guy like Davey can be in those situations, but Alonso Correa wasn't that in those parts of the field either, and he got the job done. So Charlie's a guy that, I see the Matty Longstaff element to him, maybe a little bit less of the shuttler that Matty can be in terms of box to box, and maybe a bit more stay at home, but he has his moments to get upfield too, and the goal might not have been super intentional, but it was a nice one, so it was good to see. And Hassan is I think the best way to say it is he's sort of that quintessential modern winger, in that he's not, wingers back in the day, I'm dating myself a little bit here, I guess, was like, it was all pace. It was all about getting up that wing and either flinging a cross in or getting a shot off or getting inside your man and driving into the box. And Hassan kind of does a little bit of everything in that regard. He's so silky on the ball. And if you want an example of this, the best one is the fourth goal against Philly on the weekend, where we've all seen players round a goalkeeper hundreds of times. You take that first touch to poke the ball past the goalkeeper, and then you get yourself settled, and then you tuck the second one into the open net. And sometimes if you're off balance enough, the chance evaporates before you get the time to do that. And the way that Hassan did it, first he forced the turnover himself. The ball goes to Charlie Sharp. Charlie plays him in. He takes one touch to get around the keeper, and then not the same touch, but in the same fluid movement, he's putting that second touch into the net. And it was just sometimes you see little glimpses and it's like, oh, okay, I see. But he's got all the tools that you need from those positions, and he's incredibly versatile too, in terms of the different kinds of looks he can throw at a team. If we go back to the Schaffelberg thing, the knock on Schaffelberg back in the day was that he literally had the one move, and the question with him was he going to develop it to the point where it was that unstoppable move, or was he going to add some extra tools to his arsenal? And I think we've seen him add some extra tools to those arsenals.
Agree.
To that arsenal, sorry, in recent months. Hassan's got a lot of variety in terms of how he can threaten teams and how he interplays with his teammates. And he's not going to break lines. He's not as fleet-footed as a guy like Jacob is, but a potentially valuable piece. But again, we go back to that jump from, next pros in their third year. And my takeaway is always that it in a lot of ways it is the same as MLS. It looks the same. It's set up the same. It's the same jerseys, the same teams, all that sort of thing. But the distance between that top tier professional expression of the academy to going out every Saturday at BMO Field and winning matches is a massive jump. And I don't think we know yet exactly what it takes for guys to make that jump. It's so inconsistent across the league. So plenty of guys to keep an eye on, and a good reason to be keeping on top of TFC2 this time of year is that, they're in a playoff race of their own at the moment. They've got 8 games left this season.
LFG.
They've had some struggles in the middle of the year in particular, where results, they were playing well, and they were, what's the best way to put this? They're a team where they rarely beat a side by absolutely destroying them, but I think the best way I can explain this is there were a couple matches last year where they would have 70% of the possession and hit almost 700 passes and lose 2-1. And it was because the other team had 2 shots and both their shots went in, and TFC just needed to create the perfect chance in order to score their goal. They've been a little bit more free-flowing this year, but they're still a team that needs things to go right for them, or else they end up getting punished. And the way that Johnny's explained this is like, the other team will have 2 shots that have an XG of 0.05 and they score those 2 goals, and TFC will need an accumulation of 2 XG before they get their goal. And so they had a run like where fun. Results.
Where do I sign up? Jeez.
It's the parallels between the first team and the second team run deep. So I'm living this twice over.
Well, hey, they're supposed to mirror the first team. So, there you go. There's your mirror. All right, that is your TFC 2 corner. Guys,
that was great. Pretty definitive. That was, wow.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to, again, continue to follow the second team, because there are guys there that could be looking at senior deals next year. And
ready to break our hearts.
Maybe, and I do think you're right, James, and G Money talks about it as well in the comments here. Just like the level between MLS Next Pro and MLS, the gap is still fairly large, and it might make sense to continue to maybe loan players out, whether it be CPL, maybe it be USL Championship, more so to get like that, like adult, like senior football experience. In teams where winning and losing really matters from that perspective, and I think that's something that some players may need that. Some players may be able to step into the first team right away, but there is a gap there. So it's going to be interesting to see if guys can. But then you look at teams like Columbus Crew too, right? Like, I know you're talking about one of the better MLS Next Pro teams out there, and they've been able to get guys, basically from their 2 team into the first team pretty successfully.
I think I've talked about this a couple times before. Is just that I think it's much easier for a young player to step into a side that is firing on all cylinders. True. And this goes all the way back to the conversation about Jaquille Marshall-Rutty and how TFC have used him over these 4 or 5 years. Is that for young players to take those next difficult steps in their career, they need to have a support system around them. And when the team is winning and when everybody is pulling their weight, and when things are ticking over, it's so much easier. Not that it's easy, but it's so much more possible for a young player to step in and go, okay, my job here is to do this, and the rest of the team is expecting me to do this, but my job is defined within narrow enough parameters that I can rise up to fulfill that. Whereas if the team around you is struggling and people aren't working for each other, and the system is a little bit unclear, then you no longer have that framework, those guideposts to guide you, as guideposts are supposed to do, I guess. And so, like, when you look at a team like Columbus, who has had the success that they've had in terms of bringing the guys from their second team to their first team, they're plugging them into a well-oiled machine, and the machine is ticking around them, and they just have to do their part. With TFC over the last couple of years, it's been a pretty loose framework, and that just makes it that much harder for a young player to excel in those situations. And so the 2 teams are intertwined in so many ways, and you need them. You need the first team to function as a guide for the second team, and you need the second team to support the first team. So it's complicated. I'm yet to meet a coach who absolutely loves having players drop down on him the Thursday before a Saturday game because the guy needs some minutes, and you've had a game plan that you've been working on for so long. But that's the gig, and so I wouldn't get too razzled about Columbus excelling and TFC not necessarily, but it definitely shows you that it can be done, and I think that's what every club wants to do.
Absolutely. Awesome. And I couldn't say it any better than that, so that's probably where we'll leave it. Gentlemen, unless you had any other thoughts or questions for James, I think we can wrap up the show.
I had to grab takeout that smells so good that I'm leaving the second we wrap this show, gentlemen. All
right, well then, let's not delay. Thank you for tuning in to another Toronto Till I Die episode. Follow us on all the socials. You can put in the old Google Toronto Till I Die. You can find us pretty much anywhere. In terms of your podcasts, please rate and review. We always appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed on YouTube already, please do so so you can get and hit the bell for notifications when we go live. For Jeffrey P. Nesker, Michael Singh, and James Grossi, I'm Mike Newell. Yeah, we'll see you next week, I think. Yeah, we'll see you next week. Cheers, everybody.
And wait, and baby, I'm TFC till I die.